Everyone, and welcome to our webinar today on From Insights to Influence, Driving Strategic Decisions That Matter. We are very happy to have you with us. Leading this session are two experts, Jesper Martel and David Kalinowski. Jesper Martel is the CEO and co-founder of Commentelli, the company behind the award-winning Intelligence Today platform. He's recognized as a global leader in competitive intelligence and is the author of Gardens of Intelligence. David Kalinowski is the president and co-founder of Proactive Worldwide, a leading global competitive intelligence advisory firm. He is recognized as a world-renowned CI expert with 36 years of experience, advising over 250 Fortune 1000 companies, and is the best-selling author of 3 books, including The CI-Driven CEO. With a career dedicated to helping senior leadership teams anticipate critical market shifts, David brings unmatched strategic expertise in transforming raw intelligence into competitive advantage.
Thank you, and welcome everyone to today's webinar. A special welcome to you, David.
Well, thank you. Appreciate the opportunity to spend some time with you today.
Yeah, no, we're very pleased to have you here, and I think there are a few people who deserve the title CI expert better than you do. So very happy to have you here. We'll try and make this as interactive as possible. I'll try and moderate, but please do ask questions in the chat as we go along, and we'll try to answer as many of them as we can. I'm very excited about this session today because I think it's about one of the most important leadership qualities that there is, namely making decisions. That's the whole purpose of being a leader and running a business. And I think that CI, we have perhaps been a little bit too focused on what we have traditionally seen as our end results, namely the analysis and the insights. And then we've kind of stopped there and haven't taken it a step further. And I do think that we need to start doing that. We need to take what we do one step further into the area of making decisions. So I think it's a super relevant topic for today. And the way we've designed it is we've set this up in 4 parts that we will be going through. So do you want to take us through that quickly, David?
Yeah, sure. So 4 key elements, folks, that we're going to address today. One is, just some perspectives on, why do these great insights, and I have seen tremendous insights from so many different intelligence teams, don't always actually lead to any decisions. They collect dust on the shelf, or we're excited about what we deliver, and then nothing happens. So why? What's going on with that? I want to talk then a little bit about informing versus influencing. Very important. We're all historically known for informing our executives and stakeholders, but are we truly influencing them? And we'll discuss some elements around that. The third is I want to really encourage everybody to give consideration to this idea around adopting this decision-first mindset. And we'll talk about what is that and how is that different than, when you're scoping out a project and you're trying to think about the objectives and then the questions that support those objectives. It's a little bit, objectives is a little bit different here when I talk about a decision-first mindset. And then finally, how do we increase our impact? We're not going to get into a whole full, return on competitive intelligence framework. That's a completely different type of session that we have done, and certainly one that I've written on. But what are some practical ways, though, to have greater impact along the way? So those are the 4 themes.
Good. Let's start then with the first part here, which I think is super interesting, is really why. Why aren't insights and analysis from CI being used today? What are your thoughts on that, David?
It's really interesting. You can have all the traditional reasons. I'm sure folks listening, there's some that are veterans and been around CI for a while. Some maybe are newbies, and a mix that are in between here. And it could be the historical reasons around, we didn't get good enough insight. We didn't get it to the right people at the right time. They never read it. A lot of these things. But what I ultimately found is that there's no shortage of analysis, especially with the tools now that are available to us. So there's no shortage of analysis, and the issue is not rigor. I have ran into some pretty brilliant individuals that produce tremendous analysis with a great deal of depth and rigor around that. I think there is a shortage of analysis that does influence the decisions. And what that means is the issue is between design and alignment.
Yeah.
And the reality is we're designing our outputs that aren't aligned with the decision that's actually being made. And from my experience, and as you mentioned, and thanks for the warm welcome there and the background, I've been doing this for, I don't know, 72,000 hours of my life. And what I have consistently seen over those 36 years is that most analysis doesn't fail because it's wrong. I see a lot of people, right, who get it right, but it fails because that analysis that we do never mattered to the decision. So I want you to process that for a second. I know individuals, oh, yes, for that. No matter what the study, they'll do a SWOT analysis, right? Or they'll do a four corners analysis, or they'll insert a Porter's five forces, or some standard frameworks that they use.
Yeah.
But oftentimes, those aren't the right frameworks that had anything to do with the actual decision that's being made. So those are a couple of key reasons to start the discussion.
But can you think that sometimes I feel that there's a problem that even if you have the right decision and the analysis, people still don't listen. It's so hard to get people's attention in the first place. Is that something that you see sort of related to this, or do you have any other, given your background in this, do you have any other good examples of when this has happened?
Yeah, well, I think you look at something like pricing as something probably we can all relate to on this industry, and your competitor has made a price shift. Maybe they've lowered their price 15%. You have to wonder, well, what are we supposed to do about it? And you're providing all the understanding around the market dynamics and what's causing that and why are they doing it? Is it to gain share? Is it to steal our customer base? Do they need more cash flow? Why are they doing this? Is the market driving that, or are they doing that? And when you provide all your insights, executives sometimes already have a bias on what they want to do.
Exactly.
And
They don't care.
yeah, if you differ from them, which I always encourage, that we as intelligence professionals should be provocative, but it's when you differ with their mindset, that sometimes they'll dismiss what we have because you're not supporting their narrative. Others that you have great relationships with, they want that debate and discussion, and they want to make sure they get the decision right. But sometimes you don't even get to the decision-making part of it. They're already dismissing, or that after page 2 because you don't pass their sniff test on what you provided to them, even though you back it up with evidence versus their gut, along the way.
Exactly, and I think is that maybe the alternative to making a decision based on analysis and insights. But oftentimes people, as you say, they make decisions based on gut feelings, and it's not sort of based on good analysis. They've already made up their minds.
Yeah, 100%. And when you build a deep enough relationship and start having the dialogue with those stakeholders and understand what makes them tick and get their input, that certainly goes a long way. There's still people that are hesitant for whatever reason. They're intimidated by some of these C-suite type stakeholders that they're serving in these large companies, and they don't have the conversations that they need to be having, and that's unfortunate. But those who really excel, and the ones that I have seen that are truly, best in class, if you will, are the ones that will foster those conversations, even the uncomfortable ones.
Yeah, yeah. Good. So that's a little bit about the challenges that we're facing. So let's move on a little bit now. I mean, given this background here, I mean, how should we shift our focus? What do you see us sort of changing as CI professionals?
Yeah, this is a topic that isn't necessarily new, but I think the way we're framing it now is shifting. Um, I have had leaders and organizations flat out say, "Well, why don't you just go out and do your Google thing and
Yeah,
tell me what's happening." Now it's ChatGPT or Claude or whatever. It's like that's not
yeah,
what
yeah,
we do, and but that's the perception sometimes because they're used to just having things informing them. Give me the background
yeah, yeah,
information, So informing to me is defined as, background reading. It's you know, uh, clear, relevant information and on certain topics. It's certain facts and figures, and but it's just informing them. It's not encourage them to actually do anything with it or what decision to make and how they should apply it. We assume that our decision makers actually know what to do with the intelligence we provide them, and many
exactly.
do, but there's
Yeah,
just as many that don't.
no,
So we have to migrate our profession from the perception. We know what we're doing, but our end stakeholders really believe that we're providing them just
information.
knowledge
Yeah,
about a
information and knowledge.
topic or a competitor or a supplier or a partner or a customer and not going to the next step of making sure what we're providing them is truly going to cause them to pause and reflect on the decision at hand and ideally persuade them to take a particular action.
Yeah,
You know, I've run into some people, Jasper, that would say, "Well, that's above my pay grade. I don't make recommendations or I don't
no, no,
try to
no,
influence them." I was like, "Well, why not?"
no, no, no,
Sometimes it's their own confidence level,
yeah.
that
But
they
isn't
have.
it also, do you think, isn't it sort of a trust and experience issue as well? Is that to be able to do that, you do need some experience and you need knowledge of the industry and people have to, trust what you're saying, otherwise they won't listen. And that's quite hard to get. It's not, yeah,
Yeah, for sure. I think building trust through that relevance to their decision and their objectives and their goals and what they're measured on as stakeholders and what they get their bonus on and
yeah,
making sure
yeah,
everything you do links back to that becomes really, really critical. And so being able to take all this knowledge and put it into digestible sound bites and be able to be candid. Hey, this we have a low confidence in this part of it, or we talked to 17 different people, and this is why we're confident on what we should do. So
yeah,
the influencing part is being able to persuade them that your knowledge and your insights truly, when taken in together with other parameters like risk and actions and inactions of not of the decision, then they start to see you as that trusted advisor that they should listen to.
yeah. But that sounds like a process that might take quite a long time to get there. I mean, how do you sort of become that trusted advisor?
Yeah, and we got to be comfortable being wrong,
Yeah,
and deal with uncertainty. A lot of our business, the world right now is uncertain in so many ways, and hence leaders are uncertain in the investment decisions they're making. Again, not all. I don't mean it as a general statement for everyone, but there are many out there uh, who are putting on a pretty good show and they're masking and they're putting on a facade that they know the right decisions, and they often don't until later they realize. So the more we can influence early on, and the only way you really the best influence is we have to know the decisions that they're truly looking to make, and that's harder than that sounds.
it's much harder than it sounds, especially given what you say about what's happening. And I mean, things are changing all the time. So something that was maybe correct a month ago is now. I mean, everything is yeah, changing so quickly.
Well, and part of the influencing too is we have to be great storytellers. We have to be able to take all that knowledge and convert it into something that, again, they can relate to relevant, to their decision. We had an executive one time that weren't reading even our own intelligence reports that we were producing, which are already
Yeah,
concise. You guys, you all know we get it down to one page which is Mark
Yeah.
Twain said, I had to write you a longer story because I didn't have time to write you a shorter one. It's hard to write concise,
Yeah, it is.
right?
It's
So you
hard.
get everything down to you get everything down to one page, and they still don't read the stupid thing, right?
No,
So
no, no.
so
Yeah.
so we have to make sure that, but we had an executive that was like that, and so we realized then that they love movies.
Mhm.
And so we started creating these 2-minute videos
Video.
that expressed, the insights and the implications and what to do. And guess what? They were opening those emails. They were actually engaging and watching that because how we delivered that intelligence was influencing them. Paying attention about how they want to receive the intelligence is a big factor in whether or
Yeah,
not
I think
they
that's a
implement.
huge factor. The sort of the communication skills there as well.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
without a doubt.
Good, but so moving a little bit more from informing and just presenting information to trying to influence and shape decisions is sort of where we should aim, even though there are many sort of hurdles, and this is quite hard to do. It's not what a junior analyst does first day on his job. This is something that requires quite a lot of training and experience.
Yeah.
But I know that you talk a lot about, and you've already talked about, the decision first mindset and putting the decision in the first place. Maybe just explain a little bit what is meant by that, sort of the decision first mindset.
Sure. This is really the heart of our discussion today. I think,
Yeah.
folks are really good at understanding a project's objective. Then I thinking about those key intelligence questions and topics that we need to answer to help, inform those objectives and then pulling that together and synthesizing it and coming up with the key takeaways. I think a lot of people that they become really proficient at that.
Yeah.
I've still found though they haven't done enough digging on what is the true decision that we're looking to make, especially if you're not even dealing with the end stakeholder. A lot of times we have these gatekeepers or we're dealing with that in
Yeah.
between,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
we're not talking about, no, the decision is, should we acquire this company? The decision is, should we raise our prices? The decision is, should we exit this market? The decision is, do we just eat the sunk cost?
Yeah.
That we've invested because our clinical trials are not where they're going to be. And by the time we launch, we're going to be number 5 in the market and we're not going to get any share.
Yeah.
And we have to get better at understanding truly what the decision is. Because that informs everything. And starting with that end in mind, that Stephen Covey mindset, it's not about the analysis, it's not about the insights, it's not even about the implications. That's all needed, but we
Yeah.
start instead with the decision. And then we think about, okay, knowing that that's the decision, these are the things we have to address and understand and the type of takeaways we have and what kind of, intelligence we need to pull together.
Yeah. No, that sounds really good, but I have experience with, CEOs who don't even know what the decision is. They can't themselves formulate what they're trying to decide. Sometimes you even have to help them with that question. What is the decision that you're trying to make? Do you have any experience of that?
Yeah, all the time. And I think it's almost like trying to define strategy. A lot of people, as Michael Porter would talk about, right? Strategy is supposed to be, how are we going to be unique? How are we going to
Yeah.
gain an advantage? And how are we going to sustain that advantage over time? But a lot of people come up with what they think is a strategy. And as Porter will tell you, and folks like Ben Glad would tell you, those are steps to get you to the strategy. Same
Yeah.
thing here. Sometimes we hear these objectives for a project and think that is the decision. It's like, no, I mean,
No.
sometimes it is, but
Okay.
usually that's what's still, an input to the decision. And
Yeah.
what really gets frustrating for us intelligence practitioners, and I'm sure many on the call can relate to this, is when you have the stakeholders, and this goes back to your trust issue, who don't tell you the real decision, or for whatever reason, they're treating it so close to the vest that they're not telling us, and now we can't really do our job as effectively because
Yeah.
we don't know what the real decision is. So getting that relationship, having the dialogue, building the trust to understand what are you really trying to decide here.
Yeah. Yeah.
And what's great is when you really push and you just ask the simple question. Yes, you want us to do all this research, I want you to go research six companies in five different countries and find out everything you can about their manufacturing operations and their go-to-market strategy and the value proposition, their differentiators and their unique selling points and all these other things. Well, what decision will this inform?
Yeah.
And then how do we influence that decision?
Yeah.
And when they can't tell you, if they can't tell you, then
No.
we're not ready to start the project yet.
No. No. Yeah. No, you're right. But it is a tricky thing to do, not just for us as intelligence professionals, but for the decision makers themselves. So
Yeah.
take us through that a little bit. I mean, what are the different steps in the decision process that you should be thinking about?
Sure. And let me first be clear too about, I really view the decision first as it's an approach that you take. It's a mindset that you have to take because the end goal isn't better insights.
Yeah.
It used to be for a long time. We need better insights, we need better implications. The goal is better decisions, and that leads to better outcomes. And that's how I think increasingly we have to measure our success is did everything we do, end of the day, help to truly influence a decision that was being made? And then what was the net result of those
Yeah.
decisions?
Yeah.
The five steps I want to just kind of walk through it, and because we're sharing the outputs from here, I won't go into them in detail. But again, define the decision. What does that really look like? And it's difficult. It sounds easy to do, but we have to have the conversations with our stakeholders around what is it that we're trying to make a decision on? What is it that is it a cost saving? Is it an investment issue? Is it a time saving? Is it an innovation? What's the question around the decision and who makes it?
Yeah.
Who's making the decision? Sometimes you're interacting with a person and you get all this great work done, give it to them, then they feed it, and then you realize that wasn't the ultimate decision that was being made. So I think we have to make sure that we're very, very clear by asking flat out, what decision are you looking to make?
Yeah.
The second part then of the steps, in that process is we have to realize there's always a trade-off. Companies increasingly, let's say they have €100,000, $100,000 to allocate. They have a lot of different projects or investments where they could put that 100,000. So we have to think about what's at stake for all those different trade-offs in the different areas, not just the one project you're working on and that you want to influence that they should decide on, but how does that affect other things? What might have to go away, because of that decision they have to make. And we have to realize that these stakeholders have to make those trade-offs all the time. And so as we try to influence them to do something based on our intelligence, we have to realize that in their mindset, they likely have to give up something else.
Yeah.
And we just have to be considerate to that element. But ask them what is the trade-offs that they're contemplating. Sometimes that weighs on them quite a bit, and hence they can't make a decision. It's difficult for them. Have you seen that?
Yeah, I've seen that. And sometimes they don't want to tell you this. So you're not even aware that there are trade-offs. So I like that. I mean, one thing is to define the decision, but sometimes you're kind of held in the dark of what the trade-offs are, and then you don't understand why they are making this or that decision. But there are sometimes things that you are not aware of.
Yeah. So again, what are the options, right? What are the options that they're considering right now? It becomes an important part of it. So the third step involved in this is, what are the unknowns out there? Are there certain assumptions they have going into this decision? When you develop a deep enough relationship, you'll get them to be vulnerable about what they really know. Because otherwise, it's like, I've been doing this 30 years. What are you going to tell me that I don't already know? It's like, well, a lot if you listen. And so I think sometimes we have to understand, what in their mind would change their decision. Because if they already have a fixed mindset of what they want to do, as many do, or they have a hypothesis that you're teasing out, that's a little bit different. But they say, I already kind of know the decision. Then why are you calling me? Why are you bothering us? We don't have time for nice to know. You're not in the nice to know business as an intelligence professional. right? What do you need to know?
Do you have any examples of that where you've had worked with organizations where you've sort of expected them to make a decision based on what you've done, and then for some reason they haven't, or they've made maybe a contradictory decision to what you have suggested?
That certainly happens, and I think we don't always have privilege to all the inputs that they're getting. Look,
No, no, of
we're
course.
one input as
Yeah,
intelligence
yeah,
professionals to their decision, and so when you think about they have other influencers or consultants or people they trust.
yeah.
So sometimes you don't always know, but it is important to go back and have the follow-up discussion about what did I miss? What was the gap
Exactly.
that, or what didn't I ask about?
Yeah,
As to or maybe they just got some late news or understanding. But that's why we want to get to the point where the trust is there when even when they get that, they come back and bounce it off with us to be able to say, okay, I'm about to make a decision that's counter to everything you just
exactly.
talked to me about.
Yeah. But
And
I'm
we can
doing it
challenge it.
for this and that reason so that you understand that.
Yeah, and it might be a risk issue too, right?
Yeah,
Maybe what we're proposing or what we're suggesting is just too risky, and they're risk adverse and don't want to,
yeah,
to take that action. So, but
yeah,
the key is just to understand what's unknown or they have a low confidence in.
yeah,
The
yeah,
the
yeah.
the fourth part of that step is to, and this is the critical part, folks, is once we know the decision that they're looking to make, again, usually phrased as a question, should we do this or how should we handle that? We have to then think about which analytical tools or frameworks we use. It's not the same ones for every single engagement. And I know that sounds obvious, but I'm here to share with you. I see people do that or not use any analytical framework at all. So I think the more that we're able to think about how do they receive information and which tools are available to package and to frame our analysis in a way that they can understand it and digest it and then apply it becomes really important. But it starts with knowing the decision, not starting with the analysis and then using that as the way to come up with a decision. We have to start with the decision.
Exactly. And
And
then
the
the fifth,
last element here is around, how do we structure? And we'll come back to this at the end of our session here. How do you structure your outputs in a way that you do indeed have a recommended action? I still know folks that are hesitant about making that recommendation. And they feel good about their information, but that comes down to confidence and conviction, communication skills, and being okay, being different or challenging. Because a lot of times executives, we've had people say, "Okay, now we got $1 billion. That's with a B. What do you say? What should we do?" And every time you're able to give them options, so here's three potential options. We recommend option B based on what we learned, and here's why. That's our chance to influence. When they're anytime they're asking for our input, our perspective on something, we have to be polished and be ready to persuade them as to what we think they ought to do. And here's where the final thought on that element is your network, your internal network becomes really critical. So maybe you aren't the expert. Maybe you aren't the one that's best to communicate that. But then get somebody on your team or somebody else inside the organization who that leader does
yeah,
trust, who
yeah,
has
yeah,
influence, who they do believe,
yeah, yeah,
and then have them help to communicate that piece. It doesn't
yeah,
always have to be you.
yeah. No, that's good advice. Yeah. No, and I really like this picture. This kind of summarizes everything. I like this thinking because this canvas here puts the decision in the center.
Yeah.
And then you have these. Yeah, this is kind of summarizes what you just said.
Yeah, let me walk through this because this is really important, folks. A lot of us, including myself, have always been under the mindset, you get the information, you analyze it, the insights, the implications, make a recommendation based on all those things. But I want you to reverse the thinking. At least give it a shot on your next project and think about really getting clarity about the decision that's being made. And here's where also if you have different stakeholders for the same project, they're going to have different decisions they're making. And that's what sometimes muddies up the scope of a project, right? Because you're trying to do too much in that same scope. But you start with what is the decision? As an example, should we match our competitors' 15% price reduction? That's the decision. Who owns that decision? Well, the VP of pricing owns that decision, not the other people that are trying to influence that person, right? They own that decision. I've seen people, present their findings, Jasper, to an audience, internal people, and then they realize the stakeholder, the decision maker, isn't even in the room.
No, exactly. Yeah. So it's all
So
meaningless.
why am I here today?
Yeah,
I
exactly.
want to present to the decision maker because now I'm trusting others otherwise to interpret what I'm saying, and they might have
And then pass it on.
miscommunication. And
Yeah.
so we start there. Then we have to go to the top left here of who's the owner. And then we have to think about what must be true. So in this case, decision. Match our competitor. Do we match our competitors' 15% reduction? What must be true? Well, the competitors are launching a permanent price reduction. Competitors or customers are highly price sensitive. We can't defend ourselves through value or differentiation. I have some folks, clients in the CPG industry where they know their competitors' response to any initiative they do is going to be they're going to lower the price, right? So,
Yeah.
okay, how do we differentiate on value then? And then the fourth thing that must be true is that our margin loss will be offset by volume being retained. So those things must be true to inform that decision. And then we have to think of the risk of action. I do think a lot of intelligence professionals, probably many on this call, do this. They do look at what are the risks of action. Well, if we do lower 15%, we're going to have permanent margin erosion. Our sales team's going to have pressure now to hit their goals. And three, competition might steal strategic accounts. Or you might raise. It's going to be harder to raise prices later. Okay. But where I think people still are lacking is what are the risks of inaction? If we don't do this, right? So we have to identify those elements, and then you come back and if you click the next animation to now, based on all those things, we give our recommendation. Right. So we suggest you do not broadly match the price cut. Instead, let's selectively defend our value and our value proposition. Let's, secure our strategic accounts, make sure our value messaging is strong, and then we'll monitor the competition to make sure that what they're doing isn't permanent, that it truly is temporary. So you can see the different mindset here. So again, I want to encourage people to just reverse some of the thinking a bit. And when you're understanding the objectives of a project, just take it one notch higher of understanding, what is the what if or should we decision that's being made.
Yeah.
What's your thoughts as you hear me describe the canvas here, Jesper?
No, I like this. And again, as we said in the beginning, I think we've perhaps been a little bit too focused on just producing a report or an analysis or insight, and then we haven't really, cared what happens to it afterwards, and we've left that to others to. That's sort of where our job ends.
Yeah,
But
and I
this is
think again
taking it one step further.
yeah, well, and I think the maturity level of the intelligence team matters, right?
Mhm.
If you are world class or high functioning or highly effective, you may be doing some of these things and you might be looking at that decision more. Are you then influencing it? Maybe, maybe not. But I
Yeah.
still find there's a lot of folks that are in year 1, 3, 5 of building their intelligence capability, and they're just happy to, that someone's asking them for a project,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
but we have to, from the beginning, from the start of building our intelligence capability, change our mindset that if we're not influencing a decision, then we may not be offering any real value to you.
No. No.
And we have to think about whether we even take on that work. Like I said,
Yeah.
we're not in the nice to know business.
No, and I agree with this sort of, and it looks really good. from a, like a theoretical perspective to start with a decision. But again, going back to how hard this is, and this is something that maybe not even the decision makers are aware of. So let's move on to the sort of the final part then of this session, is maybe give us some practical guidelines. I mean, what ways are there to increase the impact that we actually have? Any practical tips that you have?
Yeah, there's 4 or 5. One is, focus on what matters most to that decision maker. And it sounds obvious again, right? But this again gets down to you may be a CI professional and your stakeholder gives you 3 pages of questions.
Yeah.
Like, okay, yeah, I could go answer these, but there might only be 10 actual questions or 6 actual questions that truly will help to not only inform but influence when answered the decision that you have to make. So we have to make sure that we're not going after the nice to knows. They might even have 10 questions. And I've seen people say, great, we answered questions 4 through 10. So we got 70% of the project. I was like, no.
No.
If you answered just the first question, but that's the most important question, the one that truly influences their decision, don't weigh it by percent complete. It's what is having the greatest impact. So start with really what matters to them. What I find sometimes is asking those folks, what would change, what would really change your mind? What would you need to hear? And maybe you find evidence to support it or not. The second one is just communicate with clarity. We have to be.
We talked about that before as well, using movies and different channels to spread the message.
But even if you do that, it's still your message have to be clear. We have to be concise and to the point.
Mm-hmm.
And the and's important there. I know people who have been concise, but they make no point whatsoever. So we have to be very clear. It can't be ambiguous. It can't be, hedging. We got to be very clear and directive in our messaging. And that's where confidence and conviction come into play. And so reflect on yourself. If you're not a strong enough communicator, then that's a skill to work on. The third is,
I kind of like what you said before, is or you pass it on to someone else who is good at communicating.
There's no shame in that. Know your strengths.
And you also mentioned before as well, I think keep it short, because many people, 1 page is sometimes too much. So keep it short or hand it to someone else who's better at communicating. Yeah.
Well, that's why if you keep everything linked back to that decision, you could get your answer in 2 sentences, and then be able to back it up with that framework. Again on what had to be true and the risks of action, inaction, and some of the other factors. My friend, Phil Britton used to run Best Buy's competitive intelligence team. Then he was at Ulta, cosmetic company for a while, and but he was great at having others contribute to his set of findings, and even at times, having them be co-authors, that an executive will see, oh wait, Susie Smith contributed.
It was also
I like
on
Susie.
this.
I believe Susie. So I'll listen to what you have to say.
Yeah.
We sometimes, Jasper, haven't established enough credibility yet with those stakeholders for them to even consider we can influence them.
Exactly. Yeah.
So bring somebody on your team or as part of that deliverable, maybe even their peer. Run everything by them and have them help to influence the decision maker.
Yeah, no, good point.
So the third is to turn your insights into action. So again, getting specific actions that they have to take, not just the insights themselves. We have to make sure that we're actually, converting that to what am I supposed to do? Build strong relationships is probably a 4th way to increase impact. Joe Goldberg used to run Motorola's competitive intelligence team. He used to say, what's this phrase? To be sufficiently annoying. Be sufficiently annoying. And, he would, when, times when we used to be in offices, he would purposely, be getting a coffee or beverage the same time a stakeholder in the, coffee store there on site would be getting, or walking out to the car when they happen to be walking out to the car. Not that you're stalking, you don't want to stalk them, but, but we got to build the relationships, right? Yeah. We have to be able to develop relationships if we want to have an opportunity to influence. Think about our own lives, right? Even our personal lives. We all know a lot of people, but there's only a handful of friends who I will really listen to and trust and value
Yeah.
and act on their opinion on something.
Yeah. Especially if they're contradicting what your opinion is.
Yeah, and then who are
That
you going to
takes a lot.
trust, and who's more reliable in that. And then also the fifth way to kind of increase impact is to make sure that you create ways to measure the outcomes of the decisions, and you learn from it.
Yeah.
You're
And I
not
like
always
what
going
you
to.
said, what you said before there as well, that even if they take a different decision, that you follow up and sort of understand why they took a different decision compared to your recommendation as well. So yeah.
Yeah, and the thing that people forget, final thought, and then we could get to the final elements and leave time
Yeah.
for questions. A lot of people, when they think about measuring the impact of the intelligence, they got to remember there's short term and long term. Unless you're doing something like sales enablement, where you're truly infecting a deal that you're going to win right away, you're
Yeah.
not even going to know the impact of what you delivered until not only the decision is made, but then 6,
Yeah.
12, 18 months later when you see the outcome of that decision. So, folks, keep that tracker going. Don't forget to follow up on the project that you did last year. So,
Yeah.
everybody on this call, go back to the projects you did last June and last December. And have you followed up to see,
Yeah.
okay, what decision was actually made? Was it the one that you thought was going to be made? And then what was the net result of that decision?
Yeah.
We have to be on top of that. Otherwise, we're just going on to the next project. But you want to be able to go back and say, hey, last year we did 15 projects and we were directly influencing 8 decisions on those, and that translated to $50 million cost savings or revenue generation because our stakeholders said it did.
Yeah. Yeah.
So those would be some practical ways to increase impact.
Great. Thanks for those 5 tips. So let's start wrapping up again, because I also do want to leave some time for questions. And if you have any questions for David or me, then please write them in the chat. But before we get there, just sort of final key 3 takeaways from today, David. If you were to list them, what should people bring back home with them?
Yeah, so as you're sharing here, I think that's critical. A lot of people still believe that their analysis is that on output, and that's why they're so worried about AI and tools. That's not the end output. Our judgment, our context, our perspective, our ability to take disparate pieces of knowledge that are relevant, and then be able to say this is now how it ought to influence the decision. That's what we want to focus on. So just change some of the framework and thinking to know the value is in the decision being made and the outcomes from that decision later. The second is, again, when we start with that decision, we design our work differently then. So what are the questions we're going to have to answer, and who do we need to talk to, and what information we have to capture, and what frameworks do we have to house this in to package this, versus starting by getting all that and then saying, here's some potential options of a decision. No, we start with the decision, and that drives all the other things on what we do. And then the third and final takeaway is around, as I mentioned before, the goal ultimately is to have better decisions. And if we can increase the confidence of decision makers, if we can have them say, you know what, boy, based on everything said, I would have made a $50 million mistake. Had I not cut things loose, if I had kept pushing this because it was my personal pet project and I wanted to see this through, instead of saying, no, we need to walk away because the market's opportunity isn't there like we thought was there based on your insight and your analysis. So the question was, should we enter this market? Should we exit China? Should we create a value-based product? Should we, just improve our operational efficiencies to better compete? Let's start with that decision.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
And that drives everything else.
Yeah. Great. Thanks.
I hope that was helpful. I hope people get some takeaway, 1 or 2 or 3 things that causes you to start thinking differently.
Yeah, we'll do a Q&A session, and you've already caused me to think a little bit differently. I'll start off the questions. Something that got me started is if you're saying that the goal is not really, the analysis, it's the decisions, then should we as a profession start, considering maybe renaming what we do or refocusing it from competitive intelligence to say, I don't know, decision support or decision intelligence or something that has more to do with decision.
I think if
Any
you go
thoughts on
back,
that?
yeah, it's a fair question. I think if you go back 30 years, it was decision support, and then that was almost too
Exactly.
loosey, it was
Yeah.
almost too
Yeah.
almost subpar. So people, I think, tried to differentiate by using market intelligence. But executives, what they don't understand. That's why I never use things like KIT and KICks, right? Key intelligence
Yeah. Yeah.
topics, key
Yeah. Yeah.
intelligence with executives because they don't get that. They understand business issues, they understand business problems, they understand business decisions. So I don't know if we
Yeah.
have to rename it. We just have to use the language that they're
A
used
little bit
to.
more.
And if we
Yeah.
start with, what we're here to do, our sole purpose is to help you make a better decision, help you make the right decision, help you make the best decision based on what we know today.
Yeah. 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 Good. Thanks for that. Julia, any questions from the audience? We're happy to take them now.
Yes, we do have a few questions from the audience. The first one is, for influencing versus simply informing, do you position this as a best practice with your clients and really try to push it? Do odds of this happening increase with reoccurring clients, or can it really begin at the beginning of a relationship? Trying
Great
to figure
question.
out how much to push this.
Awesome. Easier with the recurring clients, and it's easier if you almost position with them as a pilot, as hey, we are trying to evolve our insights capability,
Mhm.
and we want to make sure we're adding more value to the organization. So we don't want to just inform you, which is what we've done. You always said it's been great and it, helps you. We really now want to take the next step of being a group that you come to truly weigh in and persuade you and influence you on what to do. So I think having that candid conversation is important. I like to be able to have you start though. Try to, with you get the next new stakeholder, act as if this is how you operate. That we start with understanding your decision. So, I don't really want to tell you what the real decision, like, why? Trust is one of our values as an organization, right? So I'm on the same team with you. For us to do our best work, we really need to, I'm not going to go blast it all over the place, but I need to understand what well, we're looking at an M&A and we might acquire, this company.
Yeah.
Great. Okay, that's really huge. So your decision is what? Well, should we buy them? Okay,
Hmm.
that now
But that means you have
frames
to be really
everything.
tight within that organization. They have to really trust you that if they are to reveal that.
And that's why building the relationships, getting to
Yeah.
know them better,
Yeah.
and because maybe they've gotten burned in the past, and so you don't know. But I think easy. It's definitely you could try to make it part of best practices, but it might take time. I'm not suggesting that tomorrow you can roll out this framework across your entire enterprise, but pick a couple stakeholders that you have that relationship, that you've built trust with, that you've been a reliable partner, and just take the next step now, asking some of those different questions. And they'll raise eyebrows just because you're asking them more about the decision than you are about what information needs or gaps in knowledge do they have. But then once you
Yeah.
get comfortable
Thanks.
with that, then I would start to make it standard best practice for every net new stakeholder you work with that before we get going, help us understand the decision that you're looking to make. And again, if they say, I'm not really sure yet, well, maybe that's an opportunity for you to help them decide then what the decision is. That's
Yeah.
valuable.
Yeah. Yeah.
Mm. Thank you for that, David.
Sure.
We have another question. As AI evolves and gets adopted, how do you see it impact the competitive intelligence function?
Well, I think you should help enable it. I think you should help support it. You know, I think humans still separates the signal from noise, right? I think humans, I think AI is producing pretty good outputs. I mean, are there some people that are losing some of their roles because of AI? Maybe, but I think that's because they're allowing executives who still are trying to figure out, even what their AI strategy should be and why they need it,
Yeah.
to define what AI is there to do. And so we have to make sure they understand, that yes, AI allows you to fish in this big ocean of data, but you still need a human to tell you where to fish and what to throw back. So I think AI is valuable. But the humans are more valuable for a different reason. It is that context. It is the judgment. It's, AI can help organize and summarize, and it's amazing to take content and quickly find some patterns.
Yeah.
But
Mhm.
knowing whether it's relevant to the decision, and knowing the personality of the decision makers, that still requires the human interaction.
No, I think we touched upon this a bit earlier as well. AI is great for the sort of the information gathering part and doing the research and getting the facts in place. But then again, the influencing part where you need much more, curiosity and being able to ask why they want this. Can we do this in a different way? And I think also one important part in this that you mentioned earlier was also the risk component in this. I think AI can't really judge the risk factor, and that is something that humans have to do. How much risk do we want to take based on this?
It can certainly give you a list. It can certainly give you a list of risks, but yeah, how
Yeah,
do you
yeah,
weigh them and which one really matters? I
exactly.
think it's interesting that
Yeah,
um,
but
AI
but
by
but
its nature, AI by its nature, Jesper, is friendly. It's kind
yeah,
to you, right?
definitely.
Like you
Yeah,
give it an
yeah,
idea, it's like, my gosh, you're wonderful. That's a brilliant
yeah,
thought. It's
yeah.
like, what's not? It's stupid. Why,
AI always wants to make you happy.
Right. So you have to tell it, I want you to play a role
Yeah,
from this lens and be
yeah,
critical of my idea. And if you haven't done that, when you do that, all of a sudden you see this demon side come out, but only if you ask it. But
yeah,
so
yeah,
us humans, we're the ones that challenge assumptions. Any good business plan or any growth strategy is always based on certain assumptions. We
yeah,
assume the market's going to grow 8%. We assume the competitors won't launch new products. We assume there won't be new regulatory changes. We assume that our customers won't shift, right? We have to challenge those assumptions, and that's where again the human element. So it's important that the executives see and feel and hear from us. I've yet to see any major leader get something that, chat or some other tool churns out and goes, great, I'm going to make my $100 million decision now without talking to anybody. I
yeah,
mean,
yeah,
that it's getting closer, I
yeah.
guess, in some
Yeah.
industries, but
I mean, AI is extremely powerful. I do think AI is taking jobs from especially, junior researchers so I think there is a shift in what we do, but it's going towards us providing, going higher up in the value chain.
yeah,
And
that's why
some
when
people will be successful at doing that and some won't.
yeah, agreed. That's why I
Yeah,
think as much FaceTime or remote time, whatever you could get with those decision makers,
yeah,
to
is what's
it's
going to matter.
critical so
Yeah,
that they have this kind of dialogue and can ask questions
yeah.
and
But
but
that will
you
require
got to be
much more
prepared.
trust and expertise and experience, and not everyone has that.
Yeah.
So it's going to affect us. I
Yeah,
think we
and
have time
again,
for
remember, you're sharing your perspectives, but your perspectives is based on all the research and analysis and insights that you pulled together,
yeah, yeah,
and that's why they ought to listen to you. But you say
yeah,
you have to gain that credibility for them to be influenced. There's a reason why companies hire McKinsey and Deloitte and pay them millions of dollars for what
yeah,
some would say is regurgitated knowledge or,
yeah, yeah.
isn't
But
as good as some other things. Some of it's great, don't get me
yeah,
wrong, but they pay them because they have credibility. It's like, if
yeah,
McKinsey says I should do this, and if it turns out to be wrong, well, I made the right decision because I went with what McKinsey said to
yeah.
do. If
But
if
but I
you
think those companies are really struggling now because of AI.
they are,
Because
but if you as the insights leader
yeah,
recommend something and you're wrong, it's like, well,
yeah,
you
yeah,
you steered me in the wrong direction.
yeah,
So
yeah,
there's
yeah,
a risk there in what I'm
yeah, yeah,
suggesting here
definitely.
today.
Yeah, yeah,
But
yeah,
I think it's the way to truly differentiate and add the greatest value because then you get some successes under your belt. Now you do
yeah,
become the go-to person.
yeah, yeah. I think we have time for one final question before we wrap things up. Are there any final questions?
Yep, there's one more question. For someone trying to increase their influence days, what's one thing they should start doing tomorrow?
Well, I think it starts by asking the question, what decision will what we provide support? Start with that simple question. What decision will this information that you want us to get support? The second part is, once you understand that decision, then you can eliminate the unnecessary analysis. Sometimes people want the fluff factor, the weight test. This is a great report because it's heavy. It's got great PowerPoint slides, and so I think we have to then the third part is then make sure what you do is directly tied to that business decision. Everything you do then has to tie to that decision. If it doesn't, why are we including it? So that's what I would start with. The basic question: what decision will what you want us to get you support? And they'll either give you the answer, or they won't. And asking them, how confident are you in that decision you have to make right now? If they say, I'm really confident. So again, it's like, then what do you need us for today? You know. And if it's, I got to check the box and do this. We're not a check the box. There's nothing that you're unsure of. There's nothing that could derail you. Like, what would you need to hear that would cause you to change your mind?
Great. Thanks, David. Before we end, I just want to say a couple of words about GRIT. And this is an event that we're holding where we will be continuing this conversation about growth and risk and impact and decisions. And this will be taking place in Chicago, where you are, David, between the 1st and 3rd of September. So I really want to encourage you to if you are interested in this topic, then please consider attending live in person.
Yeah, it'll be a great event. It's our two firms and Aurora WDC, and there's no exhibitors, no sales pitches. It's just practitioners learning from practitioners. We keep it intimate. Go to grit.vip and check it out, guys. If you're in the Chicagoland area in particular. You've got some great speakers and storytellers coming.
Yeah, and they are actually doing some of the things that we just mentioned, how influencing decisions in their organizations. So I'm super excited about this event. I'm really looking forward to this.
Yeah. Well, thank you for having me today. I hope for those who are listening, you got some good takeaways and you found the session valuable and it got you thinking a little bit differently in a few areas. And do try to put that decision enablement canvas into use. On one of your upcoming projects, try starting more with the understanding of that decision and work backwards from there. And then go back to some of your past projects that you did to really see then what were the decisions and what were the outcomes from those decisions and how did what you have, have an impact on that.
Yeah, and thank you so much to you, David, as well. Thank you for joining. Always a pleasure talking to you.
Please do not hesitate to contact us using the email addresses displayed on the screen. And we really do look forward to the opportunity to connect with you again in the near future, perhaps on GRIT. Thank you once again, and bye-bye.